What is going on, you guys? This is Erica's for the win, and welcome to my review for Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. As someone who started with Bloodborne and then jumped into the Dark Souls series, From Software has quickly rose to one of my favorite developers ever. Soulsborne not only became a term to describe their style of gameplay, but it has also inspired other developers to make that type of style of games as well. Challenging games in general has really made a big return for me, not just in my gaming life, but also for this channel, where it has really influenced me to center my channel around them.
Let's freaking go! Kill her! Die! That's it, right? Let's go! Yes!
And since, beating these difficult bosses in games like Bloodborne and feeling that euphoria of just getting better, I've been chasing that high ever since. So when Sekiro was teased and first revealed, I was very excited to see what was next from Software and what kind of challenge was awaiting me. Because the Soulsborne formula has been so ingrained into my DNA at this point, I knew Sekiro was going to be an interesting challenge because we knew going in that it was going to be very, very different than what we were used to. For the purpose of this review, I'm mostly going to focus on a few key things which I feel are the most important elements of Sekiro: combat and difficulty, as well as how these elements compare to Soulsborne. When I asked you guys what I should focus on in this review, you guys agreed that these need to be talked about in depth, and so it was awesome to get those responses. I just knew that we were going to be on the same page, so shout out to you guys. But before that, first let me quickly touch on Sekiro's story. From Software actually delivered a story that was more on the surface compared to its previous Soulsborne games. While lore is present, you don't necessarily have to dig for it in order to have an idea of what is going on. The basics are this: you play as a skilled shinobi, referred to as the one-armed wolf, and you are tasked with protecting the divine heir, which is a young boy named Kuro. Eventually you have to decide where your loyalty lies: protecting the boy or following the Iron Code, while defeating enemies that just stand in your way. Found in the story dialogue, you can discover the motivations of these enemies and whom their allegiances are to. Also, in true FromSoft fashion, you can discover more details about the world and its characters by just reading item descriptions or talking to NPCs. You can even eavesdrop on certain enemies to learn their secrets, or just what you need to do next in the game to progress. Eavesdropping and stealth mechanics make Sekiro very unique and different compared to the previous Soulsborne formula. Although I feel it could have been done better, stealth brings a different dynamic to Sekiro. It opens up the gameplay, giving you the option of hiding until enemies pass, or you can creep around to perform stealth kills. My issue with the stealth in Sekiro was that it felt like a half step. The enemies and their awareness of where I was, it just felt really inconsistent. And also the items, ceramic shards, they're meant to draw out attention from these enemies, but when I would use them, they didn't really work. So the thought was there, and From Software had the right ideas, but it just wasn't really executed well enough in my opinion. Going into Sekiro, I was really under the impression I would be encouraged to hide behind walls, and kill enemies as they walk by, or open secret doors even, that way I can escape or stealth kill somebody. But those moments were just so far and few between. Regardless though, I feel like the stealth can really switch up how you approach areas, and it can make enemy encounters feel unpredictable, which is a good thing. And that brings me to my first major comparison between Soulsborne and Sekiro. And that is, enemies were way less predictable in Sekiro compared to Soulsborne. In those games, it was way easier to assess an area and approach it in a methodical way. Whereas in Sekiro, I found myself sometimes wondering how I'd even approach it at all. This was also especially true with the bosses. Many of the bosses felt erratic and tougher to calculate animation timings and movements, so this made it a bit harder to predict their movements and what they were going to do. This is because at the root of Sekiro's combat, the rules have really changed. It focuses on parrying, deflecting, lowering the enemy's posture, all the while trying to avoid lowering your own. Much like stamina in Soulsborne, if your posture is exhausted, you are left somewhat staggered and open for a ton of damage. But on the flip side, once an enemy's health or posture is exhausted, you can then perform a death blow. Depending on the enemy or the boss, the number of death blows needed They can vary from 1 to 4, which sets up a totally different goal than we're used to. The health meters aren't really the true focus in Sekiro, and instead, it's the posture meters that are everything to watch for. I've often referred to Sekiro as the clank, clank, clank game, because that's essentially what it is. Your sword colliding with the enemies and the focus shifting from chipping away health to deflecting at the right moment to chip away posture, while also staying aggressive the entire time and countering each of their moves with the right response. I quickly realized that gone were the days of dodging my way to victory, and now it was about standing in the face of my enemy, ready to counter with the appropriate response at the right time and with the highest precision. And instead of managing a set number of rules that rarely change, Sekiro requires managing sets of rules that constantly vary and change depending on the enemy. For instance, there's enemies in Sekiro where they're best meeting toe-to-toe, and just deflecting all of their movements is the best strategy. Then there's other enemies that will mix in a perilous sweep attack, where it requires you to jump if you're too close. So yeah, there is a jump button in this game, which is very different than Soulsborne, and it brings a level of verticality to the combat. So yeah, that jump can eventually become a move that will lower their posture as well. If you jump on top of their head, kind of Mario style, you can lower their posture with that. On top of that, enemies may do overhead attacks, grab attacks, or even perilous thrust attacks, which can be countered with the Makiri counter, my personal favorite move in the game. It's a beautiful move to perform just by pressing circle or B at the right time, which is when there's this red attack symbol that appears on the screen. Visual cues are just very important in Sekiro. They let you know when is the right time to counter these enemies. Sekiro is often defined as a rhythm game. I'm sure you've seen it on Twitter, I'm sure you've seen the memes, all the comparisons to rhythm games, because the visual and audio cues are constantly letting you know what button to press and at what time. Managing deflect timing and switching between moves can be difficult, especially coming from Soulsborne games where it was more methodical with just dodging and blocking. And deflecting and parrying was never really a thought, at least for me, it really wasn't. So going from just those basic moves to now this rhythm, kind of waiting for the right moment and timing everything perfectly, it can be a bit difficult. But that doesn't mean you can't get away with it. If you want to dodge and you want to, run around and kind of wait for those windows of opportunity, you can definitely do that and get away with it with some of these enemies. But for the most part, Sekiro is more about making those windows of opportunity instead of waiting for them like a Soulsborne. That's traditionally what I would do when it came to bosses and enemies. I would wait for that moment to go ahead and get in there and attack. But with Sekiro, the aggression needs to be so high to where you create those opportunities. And of course, the distance between you and the enemy and how you're using the area around you while still trying to stay aggressive, it can be tricky, and also change up their movements depending on how close you are, how far you are. And that's really nothing new, but because of how aggressive you have to stay, it just really can create more difficulty trying to manage everything going on and trying to be quick about it. Another thing that can be hard to manage is just that posture bar creating greed. When you see that posture bar going up and you see that it's so close to breaking on the enemy, it can be very easy to get greedy. And greed is not anything new, but I feel like with Sekiro, it's very easy to give in because you're trying to stay aggressive, you're trying to break their posture, and you see that it's so close. So it's very easy to give in to just being completely greedy. As I said, some of the enemies, they're just best to deflect. However, it doesn't have to be that simple because you do have your prosthetic arm, and that can do many awesome things in the game, as well as items that you can use against enemies as well. For example, you got the Fistful of Ash that can be thrown at enemies to disrupt their eyesight. You got the Fireworks, which is a prosthetic tool. This can be used to scare animal enemies, which comes in very handy. There's also a Spear, which I really like. It's great for covering more distance, especially if they have a spear of their own. And then one of my personal favorites is the large fan, which can act as a shield, and this is just simply beautiful to see in action. All of the prosthetic tools, they use spirit emblems, which can be found throughout the world and by killing enemies. They do not replenish though, so you gotta find them. But the healing gourds, they do replenish. It's much like the healing flasks in Dark Souls. There's also items that can replenish health as well and give you an edge, not just in combat by boosting attacks and posture, but also in farming, such as increasing drop rates and coin rates. Coins can be used to purchase a lot of these items, and so farming, although it's not traditional like we're used to, it's still there to do because you will need money in this game if you intend to use items and your prosthetic tools if you want to upgrade them. There are skill trees to do that. And they're not the most complex, but there is a wide variety of things to do with your prosthetic tools, and they do really give you an edge when it comes to a lot of these bosses. A lot of cheesing can be done if you use the right items and use the right timing of these items. So a knock on this game might be that it gets too easy because you're able to use these items as much as you want, as much as you farm, pretty much. If you want to farm to your heart's content, you can have plenty of these items to use. So yeah, that's kind of the knock on Sekiro, and you can make it way easier if you'd like. But just having the different sets of items, I didn't really abuse, but I did use a good variety of them, and it did open up the combat, and I felt like it added more variety to each encounter. And did I mention the grappling hook? Because that's pretty damn important. You can use this for getting over walls, for traversing the world, getting over doors that are locked and can't be opened, and even to escape from enemies if you're feeling overwhelmed. Also, the vantage point of getting onto rooftops and looking down at the enemies so you can assess what you want to do and how you want to approach these encounters. It's a very, very handy tool, pun intended, and it's used a lot. This is one of the main things you're going to use in Sekiro. So we went over a lot already, and I hope it shows that Sekiro is pretty deep in terms of combat and what else you can do in the game. I feel like even though many things in Sekiro are different than other From Software games, it still feels familiar in that way of like scratching the surface and then discovering and digging to find so much more. It gets deeper than what meets the eye, and I truly believe that the sooner a player accepts and appreciates what's different in Sekiro, especially when it comes to the combat, the sooner Sekiro is enjoyable to learn. So, since it took me a bit longer to accept playing the way it's intended, my first playthrough can be described as like a very up and down experience. And this was because I just had trouble accepting and ditching my old ways of playing. I knew going into Sekiro that I would have to unlearn my Soulsborne habits and learn new ones, but my instinct just really overtook my logic. These old habits and how I reacted to combat situations, such as relying on the dodge so much and rolling and blocking, they were very hard habits to kick. Struggling this way didn't really surprise me. I expected it, but I never really expected me to not love this game wholeheartedly right away. Sometimes I enjoyed it, and then sometimes it just didn't feel right. To stand there and deflect, it just felt off for me to do. And it made me kind of miss how I felt during boss fights from previous games where the perfect dodge was pretty much everything. And this is not to say Sekiro's combat is bad, because it's definitely not. The more I play it, especially now that I'm on New Game Plus, the more I warm up to it. Sekiro is really great at what it does. My struggle was that I just failed to appreciate it. Being face to face, right up close to enemies sometimes just didn't feel natural. And when it came to bosses, that last second dodge or just chipping away at that health and having a sliver of health left myself and beating bosses, I missed that desperation feeling. I missed that epicness that I once felt with Soulsborne, and I, for some reason, just felt like I couldn't attain that in Sekiro. But the more I played it, the more I realized that I do have those moments. They just come in different ways. And I know some will say it's not fair to compare Sekiro to the previous From Software games, and it should be viewed on its own, but that's seriously impossible for me to do. If Sekiro was completely different, everything changed, it would be easier, but in all actuality, the From Software heart is very much here. And there's plenty of the Soulsborne spirit that lives in Sekiro. Like I mentioned before, the healing gourds, the items, the deeper systems as you progress, and of course the punishment and reward system. The process of just getting good, of course, is here. And even though we aren't really losing souls when we die, we do lose XP, we lose coins. So that sense of trying not to die, but dying all the time, is here. And of course there's that consequence to death, and that's here as well. Also, many of the boss fights themselves are just so From Software, and I really appreciated that. The point is, the spirit is still here, which is why I think maybe it was more difficult for me to let go of that past combat that I just, grew to love. But I did press on and I kept at it, and eventually I got good at Sekiro. It may have took a whole playthrough, but I did fall in love with Sekiro's combat. The Mikiri counter seriously was a huge part of this. Looking for those moments to use it, and then when I did, it just felt so damn good. And then the more I was able to use it while also incorporating my own style of like dodging in different moments, jumping in others, and just getting to know and love the deflecting, things really started to click. Ultimately, I think the combat is done very well in Sekiro. And difficulty was harsh, especially at the beginning, just because of my undying habits that wouldn't go away. But the better I got, the easier the game became. So yeah, when it comes to the difficulty, I do feel like Sekiro can be viewed as easier than previous Soulsborne, because just, the deflecting, it's very easy to overpower enemies, and it's very easy to get that posture bar up and just get these battles over with. Whereas with past, Soulsborne, you gotta chip away that health, and that's all you can really do. Once you really start to see Sekiro as a rhythm game, and you play it the way it's meant to be played by learning and mastering deflection times and timing of your other moves, it becomes a whole lot easier. I felt I became good, really good, once I beat the final boss. Now that I'm on New Game Plus, I'm just walking through these bosses. They've just become cake. They were hard before in the first playthrough, but now I'm just one-shotting them, because after that final boss, it's impossible to not be better at Sekiro. It was a wild ride. So yeah, the last boss definitely made me better. I'm breezing through New Game Plus, but during my first playthrough, most of the main bosses did give me a bit of trouble. Like I said, once you do get the combat down and your timing improves, it gets easier, but going from Soulsborne into Sekiro can pose a challenge just based on trying to forget old habits. That's what really got me at first, and that's no secret. But yeah, as far as boss design, most of the bosses are beautifully crafted. They just look great. From the more, ferocious type of bigger bosses to the human designs, they all looked really good. And as for the soundtrack, it was good, but limited. Many of the tracks are recycled and used more than once, and actually when I bought the limited edition, it came with a digital soundtrack, and there's only 5 tracks on the soundtrack. 5. So that should tell you what's up with the soundtrack. But it is good. It's not Bloodborne good or Dark Souls 3 good, but it is good within its own right. And it really does a good job on, fitting that setting of feudal Japan. And speaking of that, I feel like From Software did a really awesome job just showing feudal Japan kind of, mixed with their craziness and these boss designs and all of that, these crazy enemies, but also the folklore and lore of Japan, they kind of mixed in there as well. They just did a really good job at presenting this setting, and a few spots in particular were just gorgeous. So yeah, when it comes to the graphics and just the setting, the atmosphere, it was great. And also fun to explore. That might be some of my best highlights. I think one of you asked my favorite moments. Definitely exploring and seeing, extra phases to certain bosses, kind of having that surprise moment. You probably know which one I'm talking about. The last boss, of course. There are some great moments in the game. But yeah, you guys, I hope you enjoyed my review of Sekiro. Although, I do like Soulsborne better. I know that I do. I would still recommend this game to anyone. It definitely presents a challenge, and it will test your patience and perseverance. which is really what I look for in a From Software game. And they succeeded at that. They really did. And really, I think that's the most important thing. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you think about the review and the game itself. Let me know in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching, you guys, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.